The room was not special in any way. It was the kind of place people passed through every day without remembering much about it later. Soft lights hung from the ceiling, chairs were placed without much thought, and an old piano rested near the wall. Its surface had small scratches, signs that many hands had touched it before, some carefully, some without care. Most people in the room saw it as decoration, nothing more. People had gathered for a casual event. There was laughter, light talk, and the sound of cups being placed on tables. Some spoke about work, some about small wins in life, and others about music they liked but never really played. A few believed they knew a lot about piano just because they listened to famous performances online. Confidence filled the air, even when real skill was missing. Among them was a quiet figure who stayed slightly apart. This person did not try to stand out. They listened more than they spoke, and observed more than they reacted. Their clothes were simple, clean but plain, blending easily into the background. Most people did not notice them at all, and those who did saw nothing unusual. No one guessed that music had once been a big part of this person's life. As the conversations continued, tension slowly shifted toward the piano. Someone joked about how easy it was to play a few notes. Another laughed and said, anyone could do it with a little practice. A third person added that talent was overrated and that piano was more about confidence than skill. These words were said without bad intention, but they carried a careless tone. Then came the idea of a challenge. It was not planned. It came out of boredom more than excitement. Someone suggested that anyone could sit down and try to play something simple. Nothing serious, just for fun. A few people clapped lightly, encouraging the idea. Others smiled, already imagining a weak performance they could laugh about later. One by one, people looked at each other, waiting for someone else to go first. Some avoided eye contact. Some made excuses. One person said their hands were tired. Another said they had never touched a piano before. The challenge was still light, but the pressure had started to grow then. Without clear reason, attention shifted toward the quiet person near the edge of the room. Someone noticed them and pointed gently, asking if they wanted to try. The question was said with a smile, but it carried doubt. A few others looked over, surprised, as if this person had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Soft laughter followed, not cruel, but not kind either. It was the kind of laughter that comes from low expectations. The quiet person felt the eyes on them. For a moment, they considered shaking their head and staying silent. It would have been easier. They were used to staying unseen. They had spent years letting others take the spotlight while they stayed in the background. Memories surfaced quietly. Late nights spent practicing alone. Fingers sore from pressing keys for hours. Moments of frustration when progress felt slow. Moments of joy when a piece finally sounded right. All of that had happened far from rooms like this, far from people like these. They looked at the piano again. It seemed smaller now, less intimidating. Almost familiar, the room grew quieter as they stood up. No one expected much. Some thought it was brave just to try. Others thought it might be awkward, but entertaining. A few whispered to each other. Already judging before a single note had been played, the walk to the piano felt longer than it was. Each step echoed in the quiet space. The bench was slightly cold as they sat down. The piano keys were worn, some more than others. They placed their hands gently on top, not pressing yet. Just resting. For a brief second, doubt tried to return. Not about ability, but about the moment. About whether this was the right place, the right time, the right people. But then they took a slow breath and let it go. Someone in the room cleared their throat. Another shifted in their seat. The air felt heavy with waiting. The first note was soft, so soft that some people barely noticed it. It sounded simple, almost too simple. A few listeners exchanged quick looks, as if to say, this is exactly what we expected. The quiet person continued, pressing the next keys with care. The melody was basic, slow, and gentle. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. Just clean, honest sound. The kind that does not try to impress but asks to be heard. At first, the room did not fully change. Some people still leaned back. Some still smiled politely. But something subtle had started. Conversation stopped. Movement slowed. A few listeners leaned forward without realizing why. The player's posture remained calm. Their face showed focus, not fear. Their hands moved naturally, as if the piano was an old friend. There was no rush, no show, just control. The simple melody continued, but it carried feeling. Each note connected to the next in a way that felt thoughtful. Even those who knew nothing about music could sense that this was not random. It was intentional. One person near the front lowered their phone, forgetting they had been recording for fun. Another stopped smiling and simply listened. The room was not silent, but it was no longer careless. The quiet person did not look up. Their eyes stayed on the keys, fully present in the moment. Years of being ignored had taught them how to exist without approval. Right now, the music mattered more than the audience. The challenge that had started as a joke was slowly changing shape, and though no one realized it yet, this was only the beginning. The quiet person had just finished the first few notes, and a soft ripple of attention spread across the room. At first, it was subtle. A raised eyebrow here, a slight pause there. People who were leaning on their assumptions began to shift. The simple melody, unassuming as it was, carried a depth that made even casual listeners straighten in their seats. Whispers began to move quietly from one side of the room to the other. "Did you hear that?" someone murmured. Another responded, shaking their head softly. "It's just a simple tune, isn't it?" Yet their eyes betrayed a trace of curiosity, a tiny crack in the wall of doubt. Some people still wore the polite smiles of someone who expected the show to be short-lived. But those smiles were weakening. The hands on the piano moved with a calm certainty. There was no hurry, no attempt to impress with speed or complexity. Every note was measured, deliberate, filled with intent. The melody was not loud or dramatic, but it had a quiet force that pulled attention. Without needing to demand it, the audience started to notice things they did not expect. The player's posture, steady and composed. The way their fingers curved naturally over the keys. The subtle pauses that created space in the music, giving it room to breathe. Even without knowing musical theory, people could sense the thought behind each sound. Some listeners tried to whisper among themselves, to break the spell of curiosity, but words felt small and inadequate. One person started a conversation about something completely unrelated, only to trail off mid-sentence as the music claimed their focus. Another fidgeted with a cup in their hand, but their gaze kept returning to the piano. The quiet person's mind was clear. Memories of being doubted, overlooked, and underestimated hovered in the background but did not disturb the moment. There was a strange comfort in it, in knowing that the audience expected little and that they could now show without a word, without argument, what skill and patience had cultivated. It was a private victory shared in public. One observer, who had spoken most about how easy the piano was, shifted uncomfortably in their chair. Their smile faltered as they realized they had underestimated what they were witnessing. The confidence they had carried into the room now seemed premature, fragile. They leaned forward slightly, trying to catch every movement. Every sound, another person crossed their arms, skeptical, but their eyes were fixed, betraying an internal conflict between disbelief and fascination. It was hard to look away. Even casual listeners felt the music move them in ways they had not expected. It was not just notes. It was feeling, intention, presence. The melody began to evolve without fanfare. Subtle shifts in tempo, slight rises and falls in tone, drew listeners in deeper. Some of the audience found themselves holding their breath. Others unconsciously leaned in closer. No one dared make a sound that might disturb the quiet unfolding of skill and emotion. The piano, once a forgotten fixture, had become the center of attention, almost sacred in its simplicity. The quiet person's eyes were calm, their expression neutral, but their mind was alive with focus. They were aware of every touch of their fingers on the keys, every pause, every subtle change in rhythm. It was not about impressing anyone. It was about telling a story through sound, a story that did not need words. An older listener, someone who had played a little in the past, recognized the discipline behind each movement. There was no wasteful motion, no showiness. Every action was intentional, precise, graceful. They felt a mixture of admiration and surprise, as if they had stumbled upon a secret well of skill they had never expected to find. The quiet person's music began to draw out more nuanced emotions, moments of softness, moments of tension, subtle changes that spoke of patience, struggle, and quiet triumph. It was as if the piano was a mirror reflecting years of practice and silent determination. People who had laughed moments ago were now caught in reflection, even awe. Some began to wonder how someone so unassuming could carry such command. They exchanged glances with each other, silent questions written on their faces. Who is this? How long have they been practicing? Why haven't we noticed before? The answers were irrelevant. The music spoke for itself. The quiet person, though aware of the shifting atmosphere, did not pause or falter. They had learned long ago that true focus comes not from fear or expectation, but from quiet determination. They played for the music, not the applause. Still, they sensed the subtle change in energy around them. The audience's doubts were melting into admiration. A younger listener, someone who had come for entertainment, realized they were holding back tears. Not because the music was sad, but because it was unexpectedly moving. It was real, honest, human. The simplicity of the melody made it accessible to everyone. Yet it carried layers of emotion that only deep understanding could fully appreciate. A few people shifted uncomfortably, unable to reconcile the quiet person's ordinary appearance with the extraordinary music flowing from the piano. Their assumptions about talent and presentation were being challenged in real time. Some laughed nervously, some shook their heads, but no one could look away. The music continued, weaving between simplicity and subtle complexity. The room became a shared space of focus. Conversations ceased. The casual event had transformed. The piano and the quiet person who now commanded it had taken everyone into a new reality. And as the notes lingered in the air, the room seemed to hold its breath, caught in the quiet unfolding of something unexpectedly magnificent. The casual challenge had shifted into something more profound, something no one had anticipated. Doubt and underestimation had been present at the beginning, but they were losing ground to attention, curiosity, and slowly respect. The music had shifted in a subtle but undeniable way. The quiet person's fingers moved faster now, but not hurriedly. Each note was deliberate, each movement precise. The simple tune from before had begun to transform. What had started as a gentle, unassuming melody was becoming richer, layered, with subtle variations that the audience could feel even if they did not fully understand. Eyes that had been casually watching were now fixed. Every listener sensed the change. The room seemed to shrink around the piano as if space itself had become part of the performance. Even those who had arrived indifferent or skeptical could not ignore the skill unfolding before them. It was no longer a simple challenge. It was a performance, unspoken and effortless, yet commanding. Some audience members leaned forward, instinctively drawn by curiosity and a growing admiration. Others sat frozen, unsure how to react. There was no laughter now, no whispering, no polite smiles. There was only focus and the quiet pull of music that demanded attention without needing to shout. The quiet person's expression remained calm. Their eyes traced the keys, but their mind was entirely in the music. They were aware of every rise and fall of the melody, every subtle pause, every moment where silence could speak as loudly as sound. The music carried emotion, but it was not theatrical or forced. It was natural, human, honest. The melody began to incorporate small flourishes, simple at first, then more complex. Listeners who knew music could see the control, the discipline, the subtle mastery of timing, but even those who did not know a single musical term could feel the change. The music told a story that transcended words, a story that touched something deep inside. A few people tried to analyze it quietly, to rationalize what they were hearing. "It's just timing," one whispered. "Maybe they've practiced this piece a lot," said another. But even as they spoke, their tone betrayed awe. It was clear that what was happening went beyond what they had expected. The quiet person, so unassuming in appearance, had created something far more powerful than anyone had anticipated. The room seemed alive with tension and wonder. A subtle energy passed from the piano through the listeners' bodies. It was almost tangible, like the quiet charge before a storm or the calm of a sunrise. No one moved unnecessarily. Every shift, every intake of breath was drawn into the current of the performance. The music grew in layers, the melody weaving around itself. Notes echoed softly, rising and falling, as if conversing with each other. A minor key added depth, a major key brightened certain passages. It was a balance of light and shadow, emotion and technique. The quiet person's hands glided effortlessly over the keys, each movement seemingly spontaneous, yet fully controlled. Listeners began to forget the original challenge, the casual joke that had started the whole event. Their thoughts had been replaced by wonder, curiosity, and a desire to understand the skill before them. The quiet person had drawn them into a world where talent and patience spoke louder than words. An older audience member, who had spent years appreciating music but rarely performing, could feel memories rising. Memories of their own attempts. At piano, of small triumphs and quiet frustrations, of the beauty and discipline. There was a connection being forged, not between performer and listener directly, but through something deeper. Through the shared experience of witnessing skill, heart, dedication, and action. A younger listener felt a surge of excitement and inspiration. They had come expecting entertainment, a casual distraction. Instead, they were seeing possibility unfold. They realized that what was happening was rare, a moment to remember. They could feel the dedication that lay behind the effortless performance. The countless hours of practice that had shaped the quiet person's touch. The music became faster, not chaotic but flowing, like a river gaining speed as it moves toward an unseen destination. Each note built upon the last, a story developing without words. The audience followed, willingly carried along, swept up in the unfolding masterpiece. No one dared interrupt. Even coughing seemed intrusive in this moment. The room had become a vessel for something extraordinary. Some listeners held their breath, caught by the tension in the rising chords. Others closed their eyes, letting the sound fill their minds. The quiet person played not for recognition, but because the music demanded it. Yet in doing so, they had captured every heart in the room. There was a sense of intimacy, as if the music reached each listener individually, speaking directly to their own experiences and emotions. The melody softened suddenly, a gentle return to the calm of the earlier notes. But this time, it was different. There was depth now, layers of memory and feeling embedded in every chord. The quiet person's touch had changed the atmosphere entirely. What was once a simple challenge now felt like a narrative unfolding, a story that only music could tell. Some audience members were moved to the point of tears, not from sadness, but from the beauty and sincerity of what they were witnessing. They felt the honesty of the performance, the human story beneath every note. The quiet person's humility contrasted sharply with the depth of skill, creating a tension that was powerful and unforgettable. The room remained silent, except for the piano. Even those who had tried to remain detached now sat fully absorbed. The quiet person's ability to transform a casual, lighthearted challenge into something meaningful was becoming obvious to everyone. There was no longer a question of talent, there was only recognition of it. The music continued to evolve, incorporating subtle changes in rhythm, texture, and emotion. The quiet person was fully immersed, and in that immersion, they created something rare. The performance was alive, responding to the audience even as it guided them. The melody was no longer just notes on keys. It was expression, emotion, and history woven into sound. For a few minutes, the room existed entirely within the music. The outside world, the casual event, even the original intention of the challenge had disappeared. The quiet person had created a space where skill and emotion met, where admiration and inspiration could grow. The audience, in turn, responded, not with words, but with attention, with silence, and with shared human experience, as the final notes of this section lingered, soft and deliberate. A deep sense of realization passed through the room. Everyone present understood, in their own way, that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The quiet person had transformed a simple, casual challenge into a moment of true artistry. They had done it with nothing more than skill, patience, and an honest connection to the music. And though no one yet knew what would come next, the sense of anticipation hung thick in the air. The performance was far from over, and already everyone understood that this was not a simple display of ability. It was a glimpse into something rare, a story told entirely through the piano, a story that would stay with them long after the last note faded. The quiet person continued to play, and now the music had grown in both power and emotion. What had started as a gentle melody had transformed into something rich and commanding. The room felt alive with the vibrations of the piano, each note carrying weight, each chord creating a new layer of depth. Listeners could feel the story unfolding without needing words, understanding through emotion alone. The simple challenge that had begun as a casual joke was now completely forgotten. The performance had taken on a life of its own, shaping the room, the audience, and the quiet person into a shared experience. Everyone was caught in the music, unable to look away or distract themselves. There was no talking, no movement, except for subtle shifts in attention. No noise that could break the spell. The quiet person's hands moved with confidence and precision. Dancing across the keys, there was an effortless grace in each movement, a visible command of the instrument that could not be faked. The melody wove between soft, tender passages and stronger, bolder moments. It was like watching water flow, sometimes calm, sometimes powerful, always moving with purpose and direction. Audience members who had doubted at the start were now leaning forward. Eyes wide, mouths slightly open, they could feel their previous assumptions crumble. The confidence of the quiet person, the mastery evident in each touch of the keys, was undeniable. No one had expected this level of skill. It was both surprising and inspiring. Some listeners felt a chill pass through them. The music seemed to speak directly to their emotions. The melody held joy, sorrow, and triumph, not in an obvious or theatrical way, but subtly, deeply, and honestly. Even those who did not know music theory could sense the emotion embedded in the notes, could feel the tension, the release, the beauty of what was being played. A few audience members closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Some sat still, almost afraid to breathe, afraid to disturb the delicate balance of the moment. Others whispered quietly to themselves, unable to stop thinking about what they were hearing. Every heart in the room was drawn into the quiet person's music, experiencing a connection that went beyond words. The quiet person's focus never wavered. They were completely immersed, as if the piano had become an extension of themselves. There was no thought of recognition, of applause, or of the audience. They played because the music demanded it, because their own skill and heart compelled it. And in doing so, they revealed to the listeners a hidden truth, that talent and passion could appear in the most unexpected places. The melody rose and fell with dramatic effect. Without ever becoming forced or exaggerated, each chord struck with clarity, each note lingered just long enough to be felt fully. There were moments of silence, brief pauses that added tension and anticipation. The audience felt these moments as strongly as the sounds, understanding intuitively that the quiet person was in complete control. A young listener, who had come expecting a lighthearted distraction, felt their chest tighten with awe. They were witnessing something extraordinary, something they would remember for years. The performance was teaching them, not in words, but in feeling, in the silent lesson of patience, discipline, and artistry. An older audience member felt a surge of pride and nostalgia. Memories of their own past, attempts at music, the small victories, the frustrations, and the joy came flooding back. They understood the discipline and dedication required to play with such skill. They admired not only the performance, but also the quiet person's humility, the way they let the music speak rather than themselves. Some people shifted in their seats, unable to contain their surprise and admiration. A few whispered to each other, questioning how someone so unassuming could possess such talent. Others simply watched in silence, taking in every nuance of the performance. The quiet person's presence, calm and focused, amplified the impact of the music, showing that mastery and composure were inseparable. The music grew even more complex, incorporating layers of harmony and rhythm that seemed to tell a story without words. Each hand moved independently, yet perfectly in sync. The melody traveled between highs and lows, moving from gentle, tender passages to bold, powerful sections. The quiet person played with an intensity that was mesmerizing. Holding the audience captive without effort, a sense of unity filled the room. Listeners, strangers moments ago, were now connected through a shared experience. They felt the music in their bodies and minds, sensing the quiet person's dedication, patience, and emotion. There was no need for applause or verbal recognition. The connection itself was enough. The quiet person continued, not missing a single note, not faltering for even a moment. Their focus was absolute, and their performance flawless. It was clear that years of practice, countless hours of dedication, and personal sacrifice had led to this moment. And yet it did not feel rehearsed or mechanical. It felt alive, human, and deeply moving. The audience, fully absorbed, felt their own emotions reflect the music. Some felt joy, some felt sadness, some felt inspiration. The quiet person's ability to communicate without words through music alone was astonishing. They had transformed a casual challenge into a living, breathing masterpiece that touched every listener. As the final notes of this section resonated, a soft and lingering, a hush fell over the room. The audience was caught between awe and disbelief. No one spoke. No one moved. The energy was almost palpable, a mix of admiration, respect, and deep emotion. The quiet person had created something extraordinary, something unforgettable. For the first time, people fully understood that what had begun as a light-hearted challenge had grown into an artistic revelation. The performance was no longer just about playing the piano. It was about patience, skill, emotion, and the power of human expression. Every listener felt the impact. It's carried along by the quiet person's mastery and dedication, and though the performance was not yet over, everyone knew they had witnessed a turning point. A casual, underestimated moment had become a display of true artistry. The quiet person had not only played music, but it also revealed the unexpected power of talent, patience, and the human spirit. The audience would never forget the way the music had filled the room, touched their hearts, and transformed a simple challenge into a masterpiece. The final section of the performance began gently, as if the quiet person were inviting the audience to lean in one last time. The music had already taken everyone on a journey, but now it became even more profound. Each note was deliberate, full of emotion and meaning. It was clear that the simple challenge from the beginning had grown into something extraordinary, a testament to skill, patience, and passion. The audience remained silent, fully immersed. They had been watching closely, leaning forward, their eyes and hearts locked on the piano. What they were witnessing was no longer just a performance. It was a story unfolding, a human story expressed through sound. Every listener felt it differently, yet everyone was connected by the music. United in awe and appreciation, the quiet person's hands moved gracefully, gliding over the keys now with a sense of closure and calm. They had led the audience through highs and lows, through moments of tension and release, and now the music seemed to guide everyone gently toward the end. The melody carried a feeling of accomplishment, of quiet triumph, of emotion that had been brewing unseen for years. Listeners, who had doubted at the start, now found themselves holding their breath. They had assumed this would be a casual attempt, perhaps even amusing to watch, but what they were seeing was completely different. Their assumptions had been shattered by every note, every pause, every subtle touch. The quiet person had not only played beautifully, but had completely redefined what they thought was possible. Some audience members felt tears rise, not from sadness, but from the sheer beauty and honesty of the performance. They had been touched by something rare, a human expression that could not be fabricated or imitated. It was not just skill, it was heart, emotion, an authenticity that spoke directly to everyone listening. The music wove around the room like a living thing, connecting every listener, every emotion, every heartbeat. There was a rhythm to it that felt both personal and universal. The quiet person had made the piano an extension of themselves, and in doing so, they had invited everyone else to participate in a shared experience. It was intimate yet expansive, gentle yet powerful. Some in the audience found themselves thinking about their own lives, their own hidden talents, their own moments of being underestimated. They realized that talent often goes unnoticed until the right moment. The quiet person's performance had reminded them that even small, overlooked efforts could grow into something remarkable. It was a lesson in patience, in humility, and in dedication. The melody softened, carrying a feeling of peace and resolution. Each chord lingered, allowing the emotion to settle into the room. The audience could feel the completion approaching, yet they were reluctant to let it end. The music had become a part of them, a shared journey that they wished could last longer. The quiet person's focus never wavered. Their eyes stayed on the keys, their mind fully immersed in the music. Yet, there was a quiet awareness of the audience, a sense that the music had reached every person in the room. They did not play for recognition, but it was clear that recognition had arrived. Not as applause yet, but as understanding and respect. As the final notes played, soft and lingering, the room was held in suspense. No one moved. No one spoke. Every listener seemed to want to capture this last moment, to remember it forever. The music, now complete, left a quiet resonance that filled the room and hearts alike. The simple challenge, the casual suggestion, had grown into a performance that no one would ever forget. Then came the silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy with emotion and meaning. It was the silence after something extraordinary has been witnessed, when words cannot capture what has been felt. For a few seconds, no one knew what to do. Everyone sat still, absorbing the impact of what they had experienced. Slowly, applause began. First soft, hesitant claps, then growing in volume and sincerity. There was no laughter, no mockery, no polite or superficial reaction. This was genuine. People stood, some wiping tears from their eyes, some smiling with amazement. They clapped for the quiet person, not just for the performance, but for the courage, skill, and heart that had made it possible. The quiet person finally looked up, acknowledging the room with a small, humble nod. There was no boast, no flourish, no sign of vanity. They had played for the music, and yet the recognition was there, profound and meaningful. The applause was a reflection of what they had quietly known all along, that talent and dedication speak louder than words or appearances. Audience members slowly began to speak, their voices filled with admiration and disbelief. They discussed what they had just witnessed, sharing thoughts, feelings, and the emotions stirred by the performance. Some asked how long the quiet person had been practicing. Others marveled at the ability to transform a simple, casual challenge into something so deep and moving. The questions were sincere, the curiosity genuine, the appreciation universal. The quiet person smiled slightly, returning to their seat, feeling a sense of satisfaction that went beyond applause or recognition. They had taken a small moment, a casual challenge, transformed it into a work of art. The performance had become more than music. It had become a shared human experience, a moment that connected hearts, emotions, and minds. Even after the applause died down, the impact remained. Listeners left the room carrying the memory, feeling inspired and moved. The quiet person's performance had changed something in everyone present. It had shown that talent can be hidden in unexpected places, that patience and dedication can create beauty, and that even the simplest challenge can become a masterpiece when met with heart and skill. The story of the quiet person, the casual challenge, and the piano would be remembered by all who were there. Not just for the notes played, but for the courage, humility, and human spirit that had brought the music to life. A simple challenge had become a piano masterpiece, leaving a lasting mark on everyone who had been fortunate enough to witness it. After the applause had died down, the room slowly returned to a quieter hum of conversation. But the energy had shifted. The casual event that had started as a light-hearted gathering now felt different, charged with something memorable. Everyone who had been present carried with them the experience of witnessing something extraordinary. something that would linger in memory far beyond the day. The quiet person remained near the piano, fingers resting lightly on the keys, not playing, just breathing in the silence that followed. They could feel the impact of their performance, but there was no rush to leave, no need for immediate recognition. This moment belonged to the music and the people who had been drawn into it. They had shown what dedication and heart could create, and that was enough, as people began to approach, offering words of praise, curiosity, and admiration. The quiet person responded with humble nods and gentle smiles. They listened more than they spoke, letting the sincerity of the audience's reactions fill the space. Some people wanted to know how long they had practiced. Others asked if this was a piece they had composed themselves. Questions poured in, and though the quiet person answered softly, each word carried the warmth of genuine engagement. The experience had changed the way people saw them. Those who had doubted, those who had laughed, and those who had assumed mediocrity had been silenced, replaced with respect and astonishment. The quiet person had always known their own ability, but seeing others recognize it in real time was a rare and gratifying feeling. It was not about ego. It was about validation through connection, about the human understanding that comes from shared experience. Some listeners lingered longer than expected. They wanted to talk about the emotions the music had stirred, the memories it had awakened. One person admitted that they had been moved to tears. Another confessed they had felt a sense of hope and inspiration that they hadn't realized they needed. The quiet person absorbed these reactions quietly, feeling the ripple of influence their music had created. Later, as the room emptied, the quiet person found themselves alone with the piano once more. The soft lights illuminated the worn keys, now familiar companions, in a moment that had changed everything. They touched the keys lightly, almost instinctively, as if to thank them for helping tell the story. The echoes of the music lingered in their mind, a reminder of what had just been accomplished and of the silent impact it had made. In the following days, word of the performance began to spread. Those who had witnessed it spoke to friends, family, and colleagues, sharing stories of a quiet person who had transformed a simple challenge into an unforgettable piano masterpiece. Emails, messages, and phone calls arrived, expressing curiosity, admiration, and the desire to see more. The quiet person received attention, but it was the kind of attention rooted in appreciation rather than fame, in genuine human connection rather than spectacle. Despite the sudden recognition, the quiet person continued their routine with the same quiet discipline. They practiced daily, not for accolades, not for validation, but because the piano had become a part of their life, a companion, a medium through which they could communicate and grow. The external acknowledgement was welcome, but it did not define them. The joy came from the process, the music itself, and the small victories found in dedication and focus. In this period, invitations began to appear. Some were for casual performances, others for small gatherings or events where music could be shared. The quiet person considered each one thoughtfully, weighing not only the opportunity, but also the intent behind it. They accepted some, politely declined others, always maintaining control over how their music was shared. The lesson of the initial casual challenge had been clear. The power of music was strongest when it was sincere, not performed for expectation or show, as they performed again. In front of smaller groups, the same magic began to unfold. The audience, attentive and curious, became part of the story, responding to the subtle shifts, the delicate pauses, and the emotion woven into every note. With each performance, the quiet person discovered something new about themselves and their music. There were new techniques to explore, new emotions to express, and new ways to connect with those who listened. Even outside of performances, quiet person found their life changing in subtle ways. They noticed people's perceptions shifting, not only in the context of music, but in everyday interactions. Their quiet confidence grew, not from arrogance, but from experience and the knowledge that dedication and patience had the power to create profound impact. People treated them with more respect, yet the quiet person remained grounded. Remembering the simple beginnings that had led to everything that followed, The quiet person also took time to reflect on what had happened. They thought about the initial challenge, the doubt they had faced, the moment when attention shifted from polite curiosity to deep admiration. It was a lesson in patience, humility, and the quiet strength of persistence. They realized that opportunities often appear unexpectedly, and that the way one responds can transform a small moment into something far greater than anyone could anticipate. In the weeks and months that followed, the quiet person continued to play, to practice, to share their music selectively and meaningfully. Each time, they remembered the original audience, the casual challenge, and the unexpected masterpiece that had emerged. The memory served as a reminder of what is possible when talent meets patience, skill, and heart. They felt gratitude, not for recognition alone, but for the chance to connect with others through music, to touch hearts, and to create experiences that would linger in memory, friends and acquaintances. Often asked if the quiet person would pursue more public performances or even consider composing original works, they listened thoughtfully to each suggestion, aware of the delicate balance between sharing their gift and staying true to the personal joy that music provided. They understood that the power of music was not in fame or audience size, but in sincerity, authenticity, and the ability to reach others meaningfully. As time passed, the quiet person found joy in the ripple effects of their original performance. Letters and messages continued to arrive from those who had witnessed the piano masterpiece, expressing how deeply it had touched them. Some described moments of inspiration. Others spoke of renewed motivation in their own pursuits, all connected by a shared experience that began with a simple challenge. The quiet person realized that their music had done more than entertain. It had created a small but lasting change in the lives of others, even in everyday life. Away from the piano, the quiet person carried the sense of connection and accomplishment. They noticed the subtle ways people responded, the shifts in perception, and the quiet admiration that came not from spectacle, but from respect. Life became richer, not because of attention or praise, but because they understood the power of small, deliberate acts and the value of staying true to one's abilities and passions. The quiet person continued to grow, both as a musician and as a person. They explored new compositions, experimented with emotion and technique, and learned to communicate more deeply through sound. Each performance, each practice session, was an opportunity to refine, to explore, and to connect. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a bridge to others, a medium for storytelling, and a way to share a piece of themselves with the world.